How do I get that to stay on? Is it
It's still
moving?
going, yeah. It's still
Okay,
going.
Nancy, you want to start?
All right, all this is going to be on here,
That's
but we
that's okay.
Right. This is Saul Samet, a survivor of the Nazi Holocaust. Born in Zbaraz, Poland, he was a member of the underground during the war. Here's his statement about his experience. Saul Samet.
Thank you, Nancy, for the kind introduction. I appreciate the opportunity to tell the story of my experiences during the Holocaust. To be sure, it is a very sad story. It is my contribution to the records of the Holocaust Library and Resource Center in Reading, Pennsylvania, for the future of Jewish history. I like this small contribution to be incorporated in the records under the title, The Unending Saga of the Holocaust as told by Saul and Pauline Samet, survivors of the Chotkov ghetto during 1941-1945. I would like to paraphrase the psalmist by declaring that from the day when Hitler came to power in Europe, millions of Jews were walking in the valley of the shadow of death. 6 million of them perished. Very few survived, and it is their duty to tell the story for the future generations. And here is my part of the story, imperfect as it may be, but I consider it, in my opinion, important to be told. We hear voices telling us to forget about the Holocaust, and the memories of it slowly fading away. As survivors, we cannot let this happen. This chapter in our contemporary history is marked with terror and horror not easily to be forgotten. During those sad times, the free world failed to stop a dictator from trying to annihilate the Jewish nation. In order to prevent such calamity in the future, this story must be told over and over again. Bigotry and hatred still exist, and the deniers of the Holocaust rob us of our dignity and liberty. The tragedy has an uniquely Jewish aspect as it took place. But let us not overlook the fact that the Nazis also destroyed other nationalities in this wholesale massacre. We can't forget them either. While not all of the victims were Jews, the fact remains that the Jewish nation became the victim. To forget this would subject us to a debilitating condition to face our future. Our youngsters who grew up in freedom can't understand this phenomenon. We have no logical explanation for them except to make them aware of our pain, rage and sorrow mixed with hope that they will not experience a Holocaust during their lives. Let me give you a few historical facts. The Nazis promulgated anti-Jewish propaganda beginning with the emergence of Adolf Hitler in the year 1925. His book, Mein Kampf, soon became popular and almost like the Bible for the Germans. They worshipped their Führer as he would be God. When he was elected in 1933 as head of state, the ill winds from Germany were blowing like a hurricane all over Europe. Independent democratic countries were conquered in spite of Chamberlain's appeasement politics. It was clear that a war will be the answer. And so in 1939, the Second World War exploded. In the early stages of this war, the Germans were victorious on the front lines, and in spite of these victories, the Gestapo systematically executed the civilian population in the conquered territories. The Holocaust began. The first victims, of course, were the Jews. Bloodbaths were daily occurrences, and we were helpless. For us, the survivors, the millions murdered cry out from their unmarked graves not to be forgotten. We consider the Holocaust the biggest barbarism of our time. To our personal grief, we see in our minds the tortured faces of our loved ones who were brutalized for only one sin, for being Jews. This record of atrocities leaves no room for justification in the annals of history. We must stop this hatred if we want to prevent a new crime against humanity. Hitler and consorts like Himmler, Eichmann, Goebbels, Dr. Mengele, to name only a few, were implementing their theories of supremacy without regard to accepted civilized values. They proclaimed a supreme Third Reich for the next 1,000 years. Hitler's brown-shirted SS men subjugated decent people who were opposing their ideas, sending them to forced labor camps, never to be freed again. From the labor camps, they were taken to concentration camps, where they were gassed and burned to ashes, so there would be no trace of them left. Yes, yes, those were terrible times to be witnessing. Who can forget the Kristallnacht with the burning of synagogues destroyed private properties, and expulsion of thousands of loyal people from their homeland. This was the signal for the solution of the Jewish problem in Europe. All these abnormalities took place long before the outbreak of the war in 1939. Yes, it must be said and underscored that there still was time to intervene and stop it, but the free world willingly and silently stood by. In retrospect, could this be attributed to the fact that the majority of the victims were Jews? We wonder. With deep hurt and sadness, we recall the fact how a boatload of refugees, most of them young children, were forced from entering America. These human beings were fleeing from persecution, but they were turned away from our shores and sent back to a certain death. Where was justice then? Was the torch of the Statue of Liberty shining in the wrong direction and not showing us the way to freedom? Those and similar signals from the free world emboldened the Nazis in their belief that it is right what they are doing. In view of this, they formally proclaimed Europe to become Judenrein territory, meaning the final solution of the Jewish problem. If some Jews survived, it was by a miracle. Our challenge must remain to define the links between Hitler's ideas and the resulting Holocaust. We must not allow such ideas to be propagated now. Unfortunately, the ugly face in the form of skinheads, hate groups, is showing up even in our times. This is neo-Nazism, which contaminates the atmosphere around us. These hate-filled people dare to claim that the 6 million victims of the Holocaust is sheer propaganda. How dare they deny the facts? The Allied forces, our own soldiers, uncovered after their victorious march for liberation of Europe. Whom are we to believe anymore? Those brave soldiers, many of whom gave their lives for the cause of liberty, or those ugly skinheads who deny it? We must find an antidote to this poison before it infects the world again. This is why we want to tell our story. It is by the grace of the Almighty God and by guidance of His hand that Pauline, my wife, and myself found our way out of this inferno. Our story will have to be in a condensed form, only highlighting a few situations engraved in our minds, because to tell the story in detail would take a book to write. Let us then begin with the observation that to survive was an exception rather than the rule. Years have passed since we were liberated, and the horrors we witnessed are still haunting us in the form of nightmares and other hurts. I escaped the first-rate so-called Gestapo action shortly after the Germans entered our town, Schottkopf. 250 people, amongst them our relatives and friends, were shot that day. The terror and tyranny began for us. We were ordered to vacate our homes and move into a ghetto. Our daughter Sonia was an infant then. My guess is that she inspired us, Pauline and myself, to fight for survival. It was not easy. The raids became more frequent, and inhabitants of the ghetto were being decimated day by day and week by week. Bunkers and hiding places were extremely hard to find. We somehow managed to keep alive, terrible though as it has been. After the final action took place and our ghetto was liquidated, the situation became desperate for us. We decided to take the last remaining route for survival, since this was the only way out. We decided to mix in with the Gentiles and pretend to be part of them. No matter how risky such a move was, being discovered as a Jew meant torture even before being killed. Since in back of us everything was devastated, our families were transported to death, there was no longer hope for us here. The tiny glimmer of hope was on the outside, no matter how fearsome it was. With the help from Gentile friends, Pauline and the baby fled town with false identification papers. We said goodbye to each other, hoping to rejoin after the war if we remain alive. Left alone after their departure, I joined an underground group trying to escape the hurt, the hunt for the few remaining after the liquidation of the ghetto. Hope gave me energy to resist and exist till I finally was liberated by the advancing Russian armies in March of 1945. To my deep disappointment, the Liberation Army stopped in our territory to regroup, and it was not before July, 3 months later, that the offensive began again. By that time, it was 18 months since Pauline was on her own in this strange world, and I knew that she is waiting for me to join her and the baby. I followed the frontline soldiers in search of them in several places, till I found them on a farm. As you may imagine, the moment of our reunion is impossible to describe in simple words. To complete this story, Pauline is going to tell how she managed to overcome many obstacles she had to face while living as a disguised Polish woman. It was not easy to cover her Jewishness. On several occasions, she ran the risk of being fingered as a Jew. Hostile circumstances forced her to run from shelter to shelter, from one place to another, like a haunted animal. On one occasion, she left the town she had a shelter for fear of being discovered as a Jew. This almost proved to be fatal to her and to the baby. She was confronted by a secret policeman who suspected them to being Jewish and threatened to turn her in with the baby to the Gestapo, which of course meant a certain death by torture. She appealed to his conscience, and for an unexplainable reason he left her go. Scared and exhausted, she returned to the original shelter, only to be told by those good people there that they are afraid to shelter her with the baby any longer. Since it was summer, she found work at a farm. By that time, the Germans were in a disarray and retreating. Everybody was waiting for the liberation. One day in July 1945, the Germans left town and the Russians took over. No longer did she have to hide her Jewishness. Free at last, and not knowing if I was alive, she planned to join other survivors to emigrate to the West for a new start in life. As miracles happen, I traced her to the farm she was working on, and one can only imagine the moment of our reunion. A new chapter in our lives was to begin. As displaced persons, devoid of our loved ones, without homes where we grew up to return to, we joined others wandering from place to place all over Europe, and finally we landed in France. Here we were told to wait for entrance visas to the United States of America. This waiting period lasted almost 5 years. It was not by any means an easy period, but we enjoyed our freedom it offered us after all the horrors we had to endure during the war. We were recuperating like from a severe sickness, and we were preparing for a new start. During this period in 1946, our second child was born in Paris. About 5 years later, on July 4th, 1951, we arrived as a family of 4 happy people in the United States of America. With the help from organizations, we found jobs and were naturalized citizens of the newly adopted country. Here we raised our 2 daughters and gave them an education for their future, and are proud of them. Our older daughter, Sonia, the ghetto baby, now lives in Israel, where she got married and blessed us with a pair of wonderful grandchildren. Annie, our younger one, is also married, works as an architect, and makes her home in California. Pauline and myself, after having fulfilled the requirements for retirement from our jobs, are now enjoying the life of senior citizens in our home in Reading, Pennsylvania. We visit with our children as often as possible, and this keeps us going. This is, in a nutshell, the story of our survival. What did we live with? What did we learn from our experience, one may ask? The answer may well be that the Holocaust should forewarn us not to be overly optimistic and not to let the comfort of delusion blind us to the realities in life. We also must remain confident that the goodness in people's hearts will ultimately conquer the evil-minded individuals, so that the martyrs and victims of the Holocaust will not have perished in vain. That's it.